not flinch. I did not set down my wine glass too hard or let my smile slip even 1 degree. I sat at that dinner table with my hands folded in my lap, and I looked at my son-in-law the way I have looked at defendants for 23 years, the ones who think they are the smartest person in the room, and I thought, not yet. My daughter's name is Vivienne. She goes by Viv, always has, since she was 4 years old, and decided that 3 syllables were too many for a person in a hurry. She has her father's eyes and my stubbornness and a laugh that fills a room before she even gets to the funny part. She became an occupational therapist at 31, bought her own condo, drove a sensible car she paid for herself. I raised her to need no one's permission for anything. I want you to hold on to that image of her, because what I'm about to tell you is the story of how I watched that woman, my daughter, the one I described, slowly start asking for permission just to have an opinion. His name was Conrad Ashby. He came into Viv's life through a mutual friend at a fundraiser for a children's hospital, which I mention only because it is almost funny in retrospect. Charming men always seem to appear in the most trustworthy settings. He was 40, well-dressed, worked in commercial real estate, had a firm handshake, and the kind of laugh that makes you feel like you said something genuinely clever. The first time I met him, I thought, he is performing. But I have thought that about a lot of people, and I have learned not to say so out loud too early. They dated for 14 months. He proposed on a Tuesday, which I thought was strange. Not a birthday, not an anniversary, not even a weekend, just a Tuesday evening after dinner at her apartment. Viv called me that night. She sounded happy, and happiness in my daughter sounds like relief and speed all at once. So I told her I was happy too, and I was, partly. I was also watching. The wedding was small. 40 people, a venue outside of Asheville, October, the trees the color of fire. His sister stood up on his side. Her name was Portia. She was 2 years younger than Conrad, recently divorced, with the particular confidence of someone who has never once questioned whether their instincts were correct. She wore a dress that was slightly too formal for an outdoor October wedding, and she spent most of the reception standing close to Conrad, laughing at things before he finished saying them. I noticed. I tucked it away. In the first year, things were fine on the surface. Conrad and Viz bought a house in a neighborhood about 20 minutes from me. I visited often, but not too often. I know the line, and I have always respected it. What I noticed during those visits was small at first. The way Viv would begin to say something and then glance at Conrad before finishing. The way she'd laugh and then immediately check to see if he was laughing too. A woman who has never once checked a room for permission to speak, suddenly checking. He never raised his voice. That is important to understand. There was never a scene, never a slammed door, nothing I could have pointed to in those early months and said that. It was quieter than that. It was the way he'd say, "Viv, let me tell the story. You always get the details wrong," in front of other people with a smile, as though it were affectionate. It was the way he'd order for her at restaurants and then say, "You always take too long to decide, and then you're not happy with what you get," as though this were a known and documented fact about her rather than something he had simply decided was true. The details wrong. Always takes too long. Not happy with what she gets. I heard each one. I remembered each one. His sister Portia came to visit them often. More often, I thought, than was typical for a sibling who lived 40 minutes away. She had opinions about the house, about the kitchen specifically. Viv had painted the cabinets a soft sage green that I loved, and Portia called it a choice, the way people say a choice when they mean the opposite. She had opinions about Viv's hours at work, about the fact that Viv sometimes brought case files home, about the meals Viv cooked, which were perfectly good meals prepared by a woman who worked full days and was not running a restaurant. Once I was there for a Sunday dinner when Portia said, while Viv was still at the stove, "Conrad, I don't know how you eat this kind of food every night." She said it lightly, almost musically, the way a person says something cruel when they want you to think they're joking. Viv's back was to us. I saw her shoulders go still for just a second. Then she kept stirring. I looked at Conrad. He was smiling. Viv turned 36 in March. She decided she wanted a birthday dinner at a restaurant she loved, a small Italian place in downtown Asheville that she had been going to since before she met Conrad. She made the reservation herself. She told me about it over the phone, excited in a way she hadn't sounded in months. And I drove down the Friday evening of her birthday and met her and Conrad and Portia and two couples who were friends of theirs at the restaurant. Viv had worn a dress I hadn't seen before. Rust-colored, simple, her grandmother's earrings. She looked like herself. She looked the way she used to look before she started checking rooms. We were halfway through the first course when it happened. Viv was looking at the menu. She was deciding whether to change her entree, looking between the branzino and the short rib, and Conrad reached over and tapped the menu down with 2 fingers. Viv. He said her name like it was a correction. You already ordered. Don't confuse yourself. She hadn't already ordered. None of us had, she said quietly. I was just looking. And Conrad said to the table, not to her, to the table, as though she were not there. She does this every time, overthinks it, and then doesn't enjoy what she gets. She needs someone to just decide for her. Portia laughed. Not a surprised laugh, a knowing one. The laugh of someone who has heard this before and agrees. I set my fork down. I did not say a word. I picked up my purse, excused myself to use the restroom, and I walked to the back of the restaurant. And I made a call, not to the police, not to anyone dramatic. I called my colleague, a woman I had worked alongside in the court system for 11 years, who runs a family law practice now and who owes me absolutely nothing, but gives me her time anyway because that is the kind of woman she is. I told her what I had just watched. I told her some of the things I had been watching for the better part of a year. And I asked her to begin preparing for what I thought was coming. Because here is what Conrad and Portia did not know about me, and what Vivi, to her own detriment, had apparently never mentioned in any detail. I spent 23 years as a family court judge in this state. 23 years of sitting across from men exactly like Conrad. Men with firm handshakes and good shoes who spoke for their wives in the courtroom the same way they had spoken for them at every dinner table for years. Men whose sisters and mothers came in to testify about what a devoted husband he was, how she was the difficult one, how she never appreciated what she had. I know exactly what it looks like from the beginning. I knew the name for what I was watching before Viv had the language for it herself. I returned to the table. I finished my dinner. I told Viv the branzino looked wonderful. I made conversation with the couple to my left about a hiking trail near Brevard. I did not look at Conrad with anything other than perfect pleasantness. When I got home that night, I wrote down everything I had observed over the prior 11 months, dates, as precisely as I could recall them, specific phrases, incidents. I am a woman who has spent her career understanding the difference between an impression and a record. I started keeping a record. 2 months after that birthday dinner, Viv called me on a Wednesday morning when she knew Conrad would be at work. This was how I knew she had started measuring her calls. She told me she was fine, and then she was quiet for too long, and then she said, "Mom, do you think I'm indecisive?" I said, "Who told you that you were?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "He just says I take too long to make up my mind about things, that I need help." He says it like he's helping. I asked her if she wanted to come stay with me for the weekend. She said Conrad didn't really like when she was away. I told her the invitation was open, that it would always be open, that she did not need to explain herself or schedule it around anyone. She came 3 weeks later. She told him she had a continuing education workshop in Charlotte. She did not have a continuing education workshop in Charlotte. She stayed for 4 days. On the third day, sitting at my kitchen table in the morning with both hands around her coffee cup, she told me about the money. Conrad handled their finances. He had suggested this early on. She worked full-time and was busy, he said, and he was good with numbers. There was a joint account for household expenses. Viv received, from that joint account, what she described to me as an allowance, her words, an allowance. Her fixed amount each week for personal spending, which she was expected to account for. Her own salary was direct deposited into that joint account, which Conrad managed. My daughter made $61,000 a year and was living on an allowance. I listened to all of it. I did not let my face do what it wanted to do. I asked her if she was happy. She said she thought she should try harder. I asked her if Conrad had ever touched her in anger. She looked at her coffee for a long time. Then she pulled the sleeve of her cardigan up slightly, just slightly, and I saw a bruise above her left elbow in the shape of a grip. She said she had walked into a doorframe. I said, "Sweetheart, I know what a doorframe bruise looks like." She put her sleeve back down. She said, "It's not like that." I said, "I know exactly what it's like. I have seen it in my courtroom more times than I can count." And then I told her, not everything at once, not the record I had been keeping, not the call I had made the night of the birthday dinner. I told her first that I believed her, completely, about everything. I told her that the way Conrad spoke to her was not a personality quirk or a difference in communication styles. I told her that financial control, complete control over a spouse's earned income, is recognized as a form of abuse in this state and in most states because it is. I told her I had spent 2 decades making rulings in cases that began exactly this way, and that I had never once seen them improve without intervention, and that I was not going to watch my daughter become a statistic I had spent my career counting. She cried. Not dramatically. The quiet, held-in kind of crying that tells you a person has been practicing not crying for a long time. I held her hand. I let her take as long as she needed. And then, when she was ready, I told her about my colleague. I told her I had already made 1 call on the night of the birthday dinner, and that the foundation had already been laid. That when Viv was ready, not a moment before, only when she was ready, there were people prepared to help her move quickly. She asked me how I had known. I told her I'd been watching since the Tuesday he proposed. It took another 6 weeks. I want to be honest about that timeline because I think people sometimes imagine that this kind of thing resolves quickly once a woman has support, and it does not always. Viv needed to get there on her own terms. She needed to believe it fully, not because her mother told her so. There were 2 more phone calls from Conrad's car and 1 message from Portia. I know because Viv told me, telling her that she was lucky to have a man who cared enough to help her manage her life, and that some women simply needed structure. Some women needed structure. From a woman who had signed her own divorce papers 18 months prior. On a Thursday in May, while Conrad was at a site visit 3 hours away, Viv packed what she needed. I drove down that morning and helped her. My colleague had already filed the preliminary paperwork. We had documented the financial control. The account structures were clear, and Viv had screenshots because I had told her months earlier to start taking screenshots of anything she thought she might need and to send them to a secondary email address Conrad did not know existed. The attorney also had my documented record. 11 months of dates, phrases, incidents, the birthday dinner, the allowance, the grip-shaped bruise that Viv finally agreed to have photographed and documented properly. Conrad was served while he was still 2 hours from home. He called Viv's phone 14 times in the first hour. She did not answer. He called my phone twice. I answered on the second call. He was not calm. He said several things I will not repeat here, and then he said, "You had no right." I said, "You have no idea who you have been dealing with." He said something about knowing people. about how this would go nowhere, about Viv being unstable and easily confused. The language came out in a flood, the way it always does when the performance is finally over, because men like Conrad have usually been rehearsing the instability narrative for some time, just waiting for the moment they need it. I let him finish. Then I told him my full name, my title, my 23 years on the family court bench, the name of Viv's attorney, and I told him that every word he had just said to me had been recorded with his knowledge, as I had informed him at the start of the call, which he clearly had not been listening carefully enough to process. He hung up. Portia called me the following day. I did not answer. She left a voicemail saying that Viv was making a mistake, that Conrad was a good man who had provided well for her, that Viv had always been difficult and that I, as her mother, had never pushed her to be better, that the two of us were alike in our stubbornness, and that was the real problem. I saved the voicemail. It became part of the record. What happened after is not a clean montage. I want to be clear about that too. Viv stayed with me for 11 weeks. She cried more than I expected and ate less than I would have liked. She second-guessed herself in the way that people do when they have been told for years that their instincts are wrong. She called her attorney 3 times in the first week to ask whether she was sure she had grounds. She did have grounds, extensive grounds. The financial control alone, a spouse's documented withholding and management of the other's income, gave her attorney substantial material to work with in the state where they lived. The photographs were part of the documentation. Conrad's own behavior after service, the 14 calls, the voicemail threats, the character of what he said to me on the phone, also became part of the record. His attorney tried twice to suggest that Viv had been emotionally unstable and prone to misremembering. Viv's attorney submitted my record. 11 months, specific, dated, the professional observations of a woman who had spent her career in a family court. That particular argument did not survive contact with the documentation. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. Viv received a fair settlement, including a portion of the equity in the house. She returned to her own financial independence. She got her own account in her own name, with her own direct deposit, and the first time she called me from her new apartment, she told me she had ordered dinner from a Thai place around the corner without asking anyone and without explaining her choice to a single person on earth. She sounded like herself. Conrad relocated. I do not know where. I do not particularly require that information. Portia sent Viv a message 6 months after the divorce, telling her she hoped she was well. Viv did not respond. I think about the birthday dinner sometimes. The rust-colored dress, her grandmother's earrings, the way Viv's shoulders went still at the stove that Sunday, the week Portia called her cooking ordinary, the 14 months I watched it build before I made the first call, because I needed to be sure, and because Viv needed to be sure, and because Viv needed to be the one to decide. If you are watching someone you love go quiet in the way I am describing, not all at once, but piece by piece, permission by permission, I want you to hear this. Pay attention to the small things. The story is always in the small things. The menu, the allowance, the sleeve pulled carefully down over the arm. Write it down. Write down the dates, the phrases, the specific moments. Do not tell yourself you are overreacting. Do not wait until there is something large enough that no one can argue with. The small things are the argument. They have always been the argument. And document everything. Take the screenshots. Save the messages. Know the name of a good attorney, because the day may come when your daughter needs you to have been paying attention. I had been paying attention for a long time. What city are you listening from? And have you ever had to protect someone you love from a person the rest of the world thought was perfectly fine? I have thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this ended. Not in any grand philosophical way. Just the plain practical kind of thinking you do when you have watched something unfold slowly and then, finally, all at once. Conrad did not become who he was at that birthday dinner. He had been that person for years, probably long before Viv ever met him at a children's hospital fundraiser in a well-pressed shirt. What changed was simply that I was in the room, and I was paying attention. That is the part people underestimate. Attention. Not intervention, not confrontation, just sustained, quiet, unflinching attention. I did not save my daughter by being louder than Conrad. I saved her by being more patient, more documented, and more prepared than he ever anticipated a mother-in-law would be. He looked at me across that dinner table and saw a woman eating pasta. He did not see 23 years of family court. He did not see 11 months of notes. He did not see the phone call I had already made. That gap between what he assumed and what was actually true was where everything came apart for him. I think about Viv pulling her sleeve down over that bruise and saying it's not like that. She believed it, at least partly, because she had been told for long enough that her own read on a situation could not be trusted. That is what prolonged control does to a person. It does not break them loudly. It just quietly relocates their confidence somewhere they can no longer find it. Viv is one of the most capable, clear-eyed people I know, and she spent 2 years second-guessing whether she was allowed to change her entree. That is not a weakness in her. I want to be very clear about that. It is evidence of how sophisticated the erosion was, and it is why I have never once blamed her for not seeing it sooner. I have been trained to see it. She had been trained slowly not to. What I learned from all of this, or rather, what I was reminded of because I had seen it many times before in other families, is that intelligence and self-awareness are not armor against this kind of thing. Viv is smart. She is emotionally perceptive. She has a master's degree and a career she built entirely on her own. None of that protected her, because this kind of control does not attack your intellect. It attacks your trust in yourself. Those are entirely different targets. The best thing I ever did was not make the call on the night of the birthday dinner. The best thing I did was write everything down. I built a record before I needed one, because I understood, from 2 decades of sitting on the bench, that feelings are not evidence and impressions are not documentation. By the time Viv was ready to act, we did not walk into an attorney's office with grief and good intentions. We walked in with dates, phrases, photographs, financial records, and a voicemail from Portia that she should never have left. You cannot manufacture that kind of preparation after the fact. You build it while you are still hoping you will not need it. If there is anything I would say to anyone watching this, whether you are a parent, a friend, a sibling, anyone who has looked at someone they love and thought something is wrong, but I cannot prove it yet, it is this: start the record now, not because you are certain, because certainty comes too late to be useful. Write down the date. Write down the exact words. Write down what you saw. Keep it somewhere safe. And then keep watching. Vivienne ordered her own dinner last week. Thai food, from a place around the corner from her new apartment. She called me afterward and she sounded exactly like herself. Fast, a little breathless, already on to the next thought. I did not tell her it was the best phone call I had received in 3 years, but it was.